Major RICO against Tony Soprano. Those things take years to build. This recent case against Joe Messino in New York, that was 7 years before indictments were handed down.
So I suppose now comes the inherent fucking grill.
Imagine Tony Soprano's finally on trial. Carlo Gervasi is flipped, and he's the government's star witness.
Tony Soprano, weak in the knees.
Only about 2 to 3% of federal criminal cases, including RICO prosecutions, go to trial. The large majority of RICO defendants resolve their cases through guilty pleas or cooperation agreements rather than proceeding to a jury trial. But 2 to 3% of the time, they do.
Fuck that honor and loyalty shit. What?
You have a kid, and they look at you. You look back, and you're looking at yourself.
But then Neil Mink stands up for cross-examination. We don't know the actual charges here because we never got that far. So this is hypothetical testimony. But there is a lot that we do know. Neil would spend a lot of time attacking Carlo's motives. Questions like, your son was facing prison.
We're Italian. You're their son. Do you have any idea what that means?
You decided to cooperate after his arrest.
You'll always be more important.
And the government controls whether your son receives any leniency, right?
That pal of his, the other Jason, already ran into some trouble. Carlos Jason.
He's a mess.
All right.
Do you really know these other boys?
I know what I see.
Neil would want to make sure the jury knows this boy.
The police pulled over some kid and found a baggie.
Neil was talking about that 16-year-old kid, but I feel like the language could apply here too.
Now, in order to beat the rap, this punk claims he saw my client drop that weapon. And mind you, not yesterday, but over 2 years ago. Using it in the meantime to shoot at cans and impress his friends.
Not only could asking about Jason's record help explain Carlo's motive to cooperate, it could also make the jury further question Carlo's character in terms of Carlo not really caring what his son was up to.
But once him and Carlo's kids started taking action on campus, as far as I'm concerned, he should stay till he gets a PhD.
Benefits of a higher education.
Hey, dude, you ever take chemistry? Because Dr. Parisi and me, we're going to do a little experiment.
Essentially, Mink wants jurors thinking Carlo didn't become honest. He just became desperate.
So each one of you go out to your people on the street, crack some fucking heads, create some fucking orders out there.
I was gonna get my cousin Tommy to call his detective friend. I've been hamstrung with that work stoppage at the office park. And seriously, Tommy says the guy can track somebody from the corn in his shit.
Yeah, I saw them do that on CSI.
At John Gotti's trial, during cross-examination of Sammy the Bull Gravano, Gravano admitted to 19 murders, extortion, drug trafficking, loan sharking. Neil may walk Carlo through his past. Carlo's criminal record, or lack thereof, would impact the specific questions that Neil asks him. It's doubtful that Carlo had a rap sheet like Sammy Gravano, but Neil may still have a lot to work with. You have a cousin who knows a private eye that you worked with for many years before you moved to Jersey. Tommy's his name, right? And when you moved to Jersey, it was because Tommy was in some hot water over some guy he was tailing that ended up dead, that businessman? Or it was the detective that was tailing him. And you and Tommy were close, right? You still talk to him, and he gave you the number of that detective who can find people anywhere? With some informants, they may have been working with the FBI for years, but the situation with Carlo will likely produce less electronic surveillance or recorded evidence if Carlo only decides to rat after his son gets picked up for selling ecstasy.
I can't believe I didn't see it.
At this point, it's time to consider 16 bump and sour compost.
Looking now. They got me on oxycodone. My whole fucking head is numb.
Well, that answers a lot of questions.
On May 13th, 2007, you had a root canal and were prescribed 5 milligrams of oxycodone to be taken every 4 to 6 hours as needed for pain. The government has since taken you to your follow-up appointments, and you're still taking oxycodone, right?
Mr. Bonpensero, is your wife here to drive you home?
Skip. Use one of the businesses we've got you in for something besides showing income on a tax return. Spend time at Garden State Rental. You have an office at Barone Sanitation.
Neil could use this information about Tony's official places of employment to try and undermine Carlo's claim about Tony's activities. He could say things like, you didn't work at Barone Sanitation with Tony, right? So you really don't know anything about how he spends his days, is that true? You started working with Tony in 2001, right? But you'd previously said that you'd been working for Tony for about a decade.
You realize I had an entire container of a port of provolone coming into that port Saturday? I fucking filled in them, put it on a truck, took it to Westchester instead of Rawway, where we always split the load.
Didn't you mostly work with guys from New York? And in New Jersey, these construction projects, there were some problems, right? Theft from the job site, work stoppages, and you were in charge there, right? You didn't report to Tony on a daily basis or anything about that. You weren't actually present for that meeting. You never actually heard Tony give that order. Someone else told you that. You don't have any recordings?
Ah, Jesus, that shit is liquid gold.
Neil could say something like, isn't it true that you're close with these guys in Brooklyn, that you do most of your business at the port with them?
A lot of things didn't happen. It seemed like they happened.
Gravano was also Gotti's underboss, his right-hand man. In Tony's case, the equivalent would probably be a guy like Sil, even though Sil was technically a consigliere.
John barked and I bit. The words belong to Sammy Bull Gravano. The John, he says, is John Gotti. The barking and biting have to do with murder. Sammy says he killed on behalf of Gotti. The defense says he killed on behalf of Sammy.
Even though Carlo was a capo, was he really part of their inner circle? I think Neil would also try to drive home this point for the jury.
So, RICO-wise, the airline tickets, mail and wire fraud, especially if the mother testifies in exchange for immunity.
Top three guys. Management. Tony Soprano, obviously, plus Silvio Dante, and we think Bobby Baclieri.
So how much evidence would Carlo really have that could stand up in court? In other words, maybe you should start watching more TV Land and spend less time talking to the government, because these other rats brought in 3 times what you did in terms of value they could have brought to the case. Neil would suggest that Carlo is minimizing his own role.
It's companies like Walmart we gotta thank. They're always fighting against tightening the ports. So, a provolone, a perfume, slides right under the fucking door.
All those inspections slow down Walmart's operation.
And what about terrorism, missiles and shit?
We actually spend a little more of our time trying to interdict the financial networks that fund the terror cells worldwide.
Mink might ask, you never contacted law enforcement to report any criminal activity or suspicious activity at these ports? Even after September 11th, when port security became a national security concern, you continued participating in organized crime and helping make sure that things got into the United States untracked and unreported?
Something to keep in mind.
I take that terrorism shit seriously. And Tony, don't even get him started.
Isn't it true that when you heard that a local contractor was gay, you wanted him gone? You didn't like that Tony didn't have a problem working with a gay man?
The social club. He's gotta go!
You weren't merely following orders, were you? You often made your own decisions and committed crimes.
Oh, take this brick! No, you got
So Neil Mink's goal wouldn't be to prove that Carlo lied about everything. It would be to create reasonable doubt about whether the jury could rely on his testimony.
Still hit him first. Let me just...
Now, Neil Mink wouldn't necessarily bring up the Fat Dom situation. You may think, well, yeah, of course, this is a great way to impeach Carlo, make him seem like the bad one. But Mink wouldn't necessarily ask about it. He would only ask about it if the government introduced it, it appeared in discovery, or if Carlo had previously discussed it in FBI interviews, grand jury testimony, or other admissible materials. Because otherwise, Neil's opening up another can of worms. Maybe it'll hurt Carlo, but it could also hurt Tony. So Neil's not going to go there and bring in more murders unless it's already been brought up, and especially if Tony's being accused of it.
That's right, Tom.
As I mentioned in the previous video, Neil and the defense does not have to prove that Tony is innocent. In fact, he only has to convince one juror.
The feds are a business, Anthony. Millions of tax dollars invested in watching your ass. Sooner or later, just like you, they're going to want a return on that investment.
Gravano admitted today he expects to be testifying for the government in various cases for a couple of years. And after 5 days of cross-examination in this case, Gotti's lawyers do not seem to have turned things their way. They have yet to land a knockdown punch.
Stay tuned for the final video in this Carlo What If RICO series. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd love to hear from you.